Vegas. My name is Jeff Feige. I am one of the two conference co-chairs of this conference. The other is Krista Paradis, the red-haired young lady who's working registration right now. We've really tried to create a agenda and a program for everybody that delivers something for those of you who are interested in being part of New Space, in changing the way the space business works, in changing the way we do things. And as we move through the next couple of days, please let me know, let other Foundation board members and others know if you think this was useful, if you think this was what you wanted, if you think this is delivering something of value to the community. Because if we're not doing something who are out there changing the world, then we're not accomplishing what we're setting out to do. You'll be hearing from me and a couple others who are up here throughout the rest of the week, but I just wanted to be the first to welcome you all here, and I'm going to pass the mic off right away to the Executive Director of the Space Frontier Foundation, Jeff Krukin.
Well, of course, welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here, for journeying into the hot desert. Those of you who know the Foundation, obviously, you know that what we've done this year with this conference, well, we're exploring new territory, which is certainly appropriate. In the past, we've been holding two conferences each year, Return to the Moon, which has been held here in Las Vegas, and our Space Frontier Conference, which has been held for many years in Los Angeles in October. We decided earlier this year, mid-February or so, to merge the two conferences, expand this, and give it a new name, New Space. So what I'd like to do is provide a little bit of perspective in terms of New Space, a little bit of history. For many, many years, we've considered ourselves the alternative space movement, the alternative space community, and we've been abbreviating that amongst ourselves as alt.space. And that's perfectly fine for within this community. But what is becoming increasingly important, just in the last couple of years, is that it's up to each of us, with everything that we say, everything that we do, to reach outside our own community. I'm sure it's not a surprise that most of the people outside the space community view human activity in space through the very narrow prism of government program. Because after all, that's what we've been doing for decades, that's what we've become accustomed to. So how do we reach outside the space community? How do we talk to people? How do we enroll people that really don't get space the way we do, that don't understand the importance of human activity to their lives? We need to promote ourselves and what we do. We need to market ourselves and what we do. We need to have a consumable image, if you will. So how do you do that? You need a brand. You need a tagline. So in February, the Foundation leadership got together. We had a day-long strategic meeting. Among the decisions that we made was to merge the conferences, to pick up the label of New Space and make that the brand, make that the image that we project to the rest of the world. And if you'll notice on our signage now, except our banner here, which we have to get a new one now, we've adopted the tagline, Advancing New Space. That's who we are, that's what we do. And when I say we, I don't just mean the Space Frontier Foundation, I mean all of you. What is New Space? Well, that's another conversation that can consume hours of time, and it's more of an art, perhaps, than a science to define that. What I'd like to do is give a few examples of what makes up New Space. Well, one of our sponsors, for example, Ecliptic Enterprises, they sponsored those lovely bags that you're carrying around, certainly fashionable for wandering the domed boulevards of New Paris on the moon. Enterprises, why are they New Space? Well, one reason is because unlike most of the traditional aerospace business, that's done on a cost-plus basis. They offer their products and services primarily on a fixed-price basis. That's one example. Another example would be companies like Rocket Plane, Armadillo Aerospace, Xcor Aerospace, entrepreneurial companies that are building new launch vehicles. Customers may include the government, not necessarily. Also include individual consumers who will be passengers, not astronauts, passengers after they buy a ticket to fly into space. Bigelow Aerospace, just last Wednesday, launched the first scale model of their Genesis 1 inflatable habitat. Certainly an example of new space. But it isn't limited to companies. One of our exhibitors out here is the FAA's Office of Commercial Space Transportation, an example of the role that the government needs to play, the regulatory and safety role that the government needs to play. And what about some of the traditional companies? You know, we don't tend to think of Lockheed or Boeing as a new space company. We tend to think of them as an old space company, and yet they're not monolithic entities. Paul Eckert is here from Boeing. Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, in conjunction with this conference, Paul led the third Lunar Commerce Executive Round. So even within an established traditional aerospace company like Boeing, there are pockets of new space, and we must nurture those pockets. And new space isn't limited to companies that are directly involved with producing space hardware. IPX Entertainment, a new company, an entrepreneurial company. There is a business, an example of a business coming into being because of what the new manufacturing companies like Bigelow or the launch vehicle developers I mentioned, because of what they're doing, they're creating opportunities for other companies like IPX Entertainment, a media company, and I believe is going to be presenting its business plan tomorrow during one of our sessions. So as I said, it is perhaps more an art than a science to define new space. I hope that gives a little bit of a perspective. But the last message that I want to leave all of you with, and going back to something I said a few minutes ago, it is really the attitude and the spirit that all of you bring to everything that you do to change the way we do space. And perhaps that attitude and that spirit is best signified by just the absolute refusal to accept not business as usual, but rather the lack of business when it comes to how we do space. So in my mind, if there's nothing else, that's the definition of new space. I'm delighted that you all are here with us, delighted to welcome you to this conference. I want to echo Jeff Feige's comments. Would love to talk with each and every one of you. Anything you have to say, any questions you have, I will be here the entire time, of course. Come up and talk to me. Would love that opportunity. At this point, I want to turn the dais over to our day manager, Amanda Harris, one of our volunteers, without which we could not put on the conference that you're going to enjoy. Amanda, and thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Like you said, my name is Amanda Harris, and I will be the day manager, and so I have just a couple announcements to make before we get started with our panels. First of all, we have a schedule change for today. So if you would look on your agenda, we have changed at the 2 o'clock to 2:30, the third Lunar Commerce Executive Roundtable. We have changed the time to 2 o'clock to 2:20. And the next panel, Lunar Commercial Opportunities, will be from 2:20 to 3 o'clock. And then from 3 o'clock to 3:30, Buzz Aldrin will be here to give a talk. And so that will be all for our schedule change. Also, in the back, we have 2 large tables with internet connections. We don't have many, so if you would, please be considerate and not stay on the internet too long, so everyone can have a chance to use it. And also, today, if you are a speaker, If you could, please see me and make sure I have your PowerPoint presentation, and that way we can go over a few comments about your bios and any other things we need to talk about. But if you're a speaker, please see me as soon as possible. And now I'm going to turn it back over to the conference chair.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, it's time to get the day rolling here. I have the privilege, as it were, to introduce the next speaker. And, you know, for any of you who have been at a foundation event before, or really an awful lot of other events before, you might not remember the next speaker. He's soft-spoken, quiet, easy to miss in a room. He doesn't have too many really defined ideas when it comes to how things need to change in the space business. But you may have heard there's a book that he recently put together. It's the Return to the Moon, and you know, that's a perspective a lot of you might not be familiar with. So, without any more of my wandering on, let me just introduce Rick Tumlinson.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, Wendell, we ought to get George Bush on the phone and have him call up Mike Griffin and just tell him to stop this shit. You know. Oh, is this on? Oh.
I'm just glad he doesn't have a shotgun.
Welcome to the revolution. By the way, that was the flag flown by the first ever commercial astronauts or cosmonauts on the Mir space station. We had a space station, all I got was this lousy flag. Welcome to the revolution. Welcome to the one place on Earth where the people in one room are talking about what we can do to create a better future for this humanity, this wonderful, great humanity that we are a part of. The one place on Earth where we are talking about taking the technologies built and created thousands of years ago by people in China and others, and figuring out a way to do something wonderful with them rather than blowing the crap out of the people next door, using little things called Katyushas, or the strangely named typo dong. Anyway, one place in the world where people are looking at what tomorrow can be like and how we can create it. The one place in the world where people are not passively watching but are actually participating in the creation of the future. And that's right here in this room. One of the great things about foundation conferences is the people that come to them are actually doing stuff. We may not have the biggest, largest, most active conferences on the planet, but the people in the room that are around you are people who are changing the planet and changing the future. We have a lot to cover this weekend. We're going to be talking about all kinds of things. Today we're going to have a focus more on the moon. We're going to move into serious discussions about how to enable and support the new space industry tomorrow. We're going to get into some more of the fun stuff later on over the weekend and have a really good time. You're going to hear more from me, so I'm not going to be talking a long time this morning, much to the relief of many of you not quite awake yet. But I do want to say a couple things, and I want to set up our guest here, Wendell, so he can smack me down loudly later. But I do want to tell you, we're in a really interesting situation. At one and the same time, we have the rising of what we just was explained, the new space industry. People who are actually building on the legacy of America's space program, trying to create something new, trying to get out there and do it themselves. One of the really interesting things to me about this movement is that in a few years, you know, we go back and forth, by the way. The foundation, one of our jobs, is to run interference between the new space industry and the government, to actually contextualize what the new space industry does to the media, to the people, to make people understand this isn't about a few trillionaires building a few rockets to carry a few, quote unquote, I hate the tourists, into space, but it's about people who are creating a new pathway into space, and in fact multiple pathways into space, that anybody with a dream someday will be able to climb into one of those rockets and go out there and paint on that blank slate of the future whatever they want to paint there. And that's what we're about. So sometimes we have to deal at times with the government, at times with the private sector. And right now we're in a really interesting place where we've got a president who has said that we were going to go to the moon and Mars a few years ago. And what's really interesting was that we're going to be putting out a paper on this a white paper. We haven't done a white paper in a long time in the foundation, but we got one coming out in the next few days you're going to be reading about. And what we're going to be talking about in that white paper is the fact that, the president, in a sense, basically, well, not in a sense, he got up there in front of a room full of people and he said, we're going to go to the moon and Mars. He laid out a vision. He then put together a commission known as the Aldrich Commission to talk about how to do that. And the commission laid out the ways that we should achieve that vision. Unfortunately, NASA has chosen basically to ignore the results of that commission, almost totally. For example, the commission, I think, my numbers are approximate, the commission said that basically you needed to use commercial enterprise to support these activities. The commission, I think, used the word commercial in its report something like 67 times. NASA's own internal documents regarding how to achieve this, I think, maybe once or twice mentioned here or there lightly. We're heading for a massive failure, mainly in the transportation area. And it kind of reminds me of it's interesting. There's a little story. I come from Texas, and people talk a lot about, rednecks in Texas, but I've discovered there are rednecks in California, too, and you just have to go a few miles outside of the city or down the block from me. And, there's this group of people out there, a friend was telling me about that. They were great fishermen, bass fishermen. And, one of the lakes that are out there, a reservoir, and had this incredible bass boat that they had built and customized for their own use, and always sitting there in the driveway, this great big bass boat. And, but these were great fishermen. They had caught some of the best fish you'd ever heard of. I mean, huge record-breaking fish they had reeled in. All the trophies are up there on the wall in the house, and very proud of it. And so they had some friends come in from out of town, and they were trying to figure out what they're going to do. Well, they're in California, so they said, well, let's go to Disneyland. And so the kids just start jumping down. They're just all excited about that. We're going to go to Disneyland. And, hey, Junior, what do you want to do in Disneyland? Well, I want to go to Space Mountain. And the little girl steps up and she goes, no, I want to go see the people dressed up like Snow White. And another one was, I want to go see Pirates of the Caribbean. And the other, let's go. I want to go, I want to do It's a Small World After All. And they're getting all pumped up, and man, everybody was so excited. And they're running around the house, and they're grabbing their clothes, and they're filling up the cooler, and they're getting all ready to go. And they all go run outside, and they are just so excited, and they all go jump in the boat. That's our space program right now. There's a lot of great things to do on the moon and Mars and in space. And we don't have the right vehicle to do it. And we're insisting on the old vehicle that we've used before and trying to keep it going. It's the wrong vehicle, folks. It's not going to get us there. That boat is not going to take us to Disneyland. It's not designed to do it. It will not take us there. And that's the big disconnect. I want to say that over the last 2 or 3 years, last couple of years, I've been very privileged to have been invited in various ways to work with some of the people in the lunar science community and the lunar exploration side of things. I've talked to a lot of people at NASA who share our dream of an open frontier and believe in the concept of free enterprise. And it's kind of sad, unfortunately, because there's a whole other side of the agency that is ruled largely by politics, by keeping standing armies of donors and voters and corporations employed in various key states, by retaining capabilities within the government that basically should revert to the people who pay for that government. And it's unfortunate because that side of the government, that side of NASA, is going to disable, thwart, and short-circuit our dreams. We're headed for a dead end, a major, major dead end. And there are a lot of good people like our and other people in NASA who are working very, very hard on all kinds of great ideas as to what we should do in space. And there are lots of them. Earlier this year, there was a lunar exploration workshop held in NASA by some of the, what I would call revolutionaries in the palace. And a lot of people came. I think 160 people came on their own dime for a week and worked on different things that we could do in space and why we go to the moon. It's interesting that having been 2 years into the planning process of the vehicles to take us, they've finally decided to answer the question why we're going, which would kind of want to make you want to figure out what kind of vehicle you were going to take to get somewhere, why you're going, where you're going, how you're going to get there, what you're going to do, how you're going to come back, things like that, little questions. And what happened was these people sat around for about a week and came up with some brilliant ideas, hundreds of ideas. And what was interesting, more interesting than that, was at the top level, these people sat down and said, well, the main reason we want to go is we want to settle. There were, I think, 6 or 7 groups, 6 groups, working very hard. This was not a passive come listen to speech conference. It was a roll up your sleeves workshop. And out of these 6 groups, one after the other came up and reported on the last day. And one after another got up there and said the goal is permanence. The goal was settlement. The goal of going into space is to go into space, to expand into space, to create a new civilization in space. And it was amazing to me. We sat there, and those others, representatives that were there with us, and we were just looking at each other. We were dumbfounded. Because these people were from all over the world. There were people there from Japan, there were people from the Ukraine, there were people from private industry, there were people from NASA, there were people from DOD, all kinds of people. All kinds of people you would never expect to be coming to these same conclusions, and yet they did. Whatever it was drove them to it. They all came up with that conclusion, that human settlement is the goal for going to the frontier. And yet, at the same time, we see a government, a portion of our government that's been entrusted to do so, which within it, driven by all kinds of factors that I've laid out here, is heading the wrong way. And it's very unfortunate, and it's very sad, because we had a lot of hope. You may have noticed the Foundation's been fairly quiet for several months on these issues. And unfortunately, nothing's really changed. We've had a lot of hope. We've seen a lot of paper, we've heard a lot of words, but we aren't seeing what we were dreaming of happen. We are not seeing the correction in course. We are not seeing the development of the right kind of infrastructure that we need. And so you're going to be hearing a lot from us in the months to come. I'm not going to go too far down this path. I'm not going to get all fire and brimstone about it, because frankly, we have a lot of friends here from NASA. And they're going to talk to us about what they're trying to do. And these good people are guests in our house. And so I'm not going to insult them and yell at them while they're here in the house. From Texas. Now, once they leave the property, all hell's going to break loose. But no, I'm kidding. But I do want to say that there are some good people in the agency, and we're looking forward to, we're going to keep pounding the drum. You're going to hear the first murmurs in the next few days. It's going to get louder and louder. And we're going to ask for your support in this, because we're going to drive until we make the changes necessary. And change is necessary. The private sector can do this. The private sector may do this. But if we can have a unified partnership with our government actually working in support of that private sector, as it does in so many other ways in our culture, then we can do it in a big way. We can do it sooner. We can do it in a way that is permanent, economical, and changes the future for the children of our country. And that's what we have to do. We have to work together to make this happen. So I ask you to join with me this weekend and begin thinking about these things. Talk to each other, get involved, walk up to people that have these little badges, the Foundation badges, talk to them and ask how you can help, how you can get involved. Now, I'm going to move on very quickly to our speaker. We're going to try and catch up on some of our time here. Now, Wendell Mendel, yeah, don't jump.
Sorry.
Calm. Unarmed. Wendell Mendel is one of the great people in the inside of NASA. Wendell was one of the first people who actually, in the agency, sat down with people like Jim Muncie and myself and paid attention. He closed his eyes and fell asleep, which we took to mean he was paying attention. But Wendell is in there, he's fighting the good fight, and he's going to talk to us about what's been going on with some of the results of that workshop and other activities. He is an Obi-Wan to some of us, and his lightsaber is probably sharper than many of ours, which is why I'm going to move clearly out of the way here. But I do want you to welcome Dr. Wendell Mendel and listen to what he's got to say. And by the way, don't just go talk to us, but after this conference, talk to people from NASA that are here. Try and get the message back to the agency. And finally, when you get home, write an op-ed, write a letter to somebody important, go up on the Hill and tell them that that you want change. You want a space program that takes you where you want to go so that you can do what you want to do, because that's what it's all about. Thank you.
We come in peace. Klaatu Barada Nikto. You are now safe from death rays and airstrikes as long as you behave yourselves. I've appeared and spoken at every one of these conferences, July conferences, even the one before the first July conference that the National Space Society put on at the Hilton in Houston. And I've never come to these conferences because somebody in NASA sent me, and in fact, quite the opposite. I often had trouble finding money to get here. The reason I came to these conferences to talk to this group and interact with them was due to the fact that I'm interested in the more general problem of how humanity will move off the Earth as opposed to the specific problem of how to manage the NASA program that might be related to that. And in particular at the Space Frontier Foundation conference in 1996 at the Roosevelt Hotel in Hollywood, I had some eye-opening experiences related to the things that were going on sort of under the radar relative to the commercial sector, building access to space and looking for opportunities to develop in space. And in the mid to late 90s, I wrote some papers expressing my thoughts on how there might be alternate scenarios for getting to the moon and for space development outside of the traditionally assumed paradigm that NASA would be the agent for developing space. By the time of the millennium, it became clear to me that the commercial wave that I thought might develop, based, of course, largely on the LEO telecom constellations, was not going to manifest itself in the way that I thought it might. But I continued to come to the conferences, and I took the role of what I consider to be sort of a Dutch uncle in the sense of trying to communicate to this community things that were happening deep in the bowels of NASA that might be related to the goals and ambitions of commercial development of space in the entrepreneurial sense, and how there might be opportunities for planning and people in NASA to really work with this community, not necessarily at the highest levels, which are the most visible to you, but down deep in the interior where people were trying to think innovatively and differently about ways to accomplish the objectives of space development and exploration. Today, I'm really here for the very first time in a somewhat official capacity. In the last 3 to 4 months, there's been a number of events, and I now hold some positions in NASA where I'm embedded in a couple of, I think, very important activities, one of which Rick referred to regarding NASA plans or the plans for, I hope, the people of Earth to move into space and to develop the resources of space, the resources of the moon, and to explore the solar system. And of course, this activity currently in NASA traces back to the speech the President made January 2004 and the agency reaction to that speech. There have been stops and starts because the people in charge of the agency at the time of the speech embarked on a particular path toward this objective, and then in April of last year, Mike Griffin was named the NASA administrator, and he had his own very strong ideas about how to accomplish this. He had been thinking about it for a decade or more, or at least probably 15 to 20 years, and he was also a person who probably the most technically competent administrator that we've ever had named to NASA. So he had very strong opinions about the path to go to the moon within the charter issued by the President within the vision for space exploration. We've had a lot of discussions about that, and Rick has strong opinions. The Space Frontier Foundation has strong opinions on the path that's been chosen by Mike Griffin, particularly in the transportation area. And I can't comment on that. I was not involved in those decisions, and I have my own ideas about why they are this way and what that might mean. But we in NASA have to work within the context of those decisions and do what we think is the best way to take advantage of the situation to continue this wave of exploration and development. One of the things that has happened that I'm involved in is something that we internally refer to as the lunar synthesis process. And Rick described, I think, fairly well the workshop that was held in the last week of April in Washington, D.C., in which there were 7 groups. Nick forgot my group. I mean, Rick forgot my group. I forgot his name. But I probably, you missed my out brief, so you counted 6 and then didn't get mine. But the attendees at that workshop were selected by somebody in NASA to represent what they thought were opinion makers in certain key constituencies or stakeholders for the NASA exploration community. And the major stakeholders were the international community, commercial community, scientific community, and the resource utilization community. And the people who came to the conference and participated in those sessions of what I would call brainstorming to lay down what is it we really wanted to do to the moon, and in fact, I wouldn't say what we want to do on the moon. What are the possibilities? What are you interested in seeing done at the moon? Gave a lot of very positive feedback to us and to our management about the way that workshop was handled, the way that their information was received, and without prejudice or censorship or any kind of prioritizations put on them. And we, of the steering committee that has now custody of that information, are working very hard to respect that particular freedom of expression. We are working to develop that information in a way and feed it back to the stakeholders communities such that we're not censoring anything or removing anybody's thoughts. And that turns out to be kind of a messy operation. The things that were written down at that workshop are not always the same, in the same category. We would have people saying that we should build a more moral society, which is a statement, and then we have people saying you should buy my 6-wheeled Rover, which is another kind of a statement. Out of these apples and oranges and persimmons and pears and peaches and everything that we received, we worked very hard for a week to try to categorize and organize the information into groupings that expressed what we felt were objectives and things that we felt were architectural elements, things that we felt were issues and enablers in the entire process. And then out of the collection of things that we received at the workshop, we tried to develop certain overarching themes. And in fact, at the workshop itself, many of the working groups produced what they thought were overarching themes. And one of the things that popped up prominently, as Rick said, was lunar settlement. And quite frankly, to people who are sort of traditional NASA employees working over the years, the idea that people would say things like lunar settlement out loud was rather jarring. But because when we go to our management and try to talk about lunar settlement, there's a lot of freakiness because of the way the political process works. And I know that at the top of NASA there's some discomfort with these ideas. But the point that I want to make is that lunar settlement is a theme that pops out of the community, not necessarily out of NASA. I want to make a distinction between what NASA should or will be able to accomplish within the vision for space exploration and what other players or entities within the space development community might want to accomplish or to take on. I wrote a paper in 2004 after the President's speech in which I argued that one of the real reasons we need to, first of all, I argued that if NASA is truly going to be the exploration wedge, as in the President started, and that NASA will be that part of the process that develops the frontier moving outward into the solar system, then NASA cannot be the custodian of all the infrastructure and systems and everything that might develop behind that exploration wedge. NASA has neither the competence nor the resource to, for example, be the landlord on the moon. So in my paper, I felt it was really important that at the very beginning of the formulation of the process, that NASA partner with entities such as this community, for example, or the international community, that might have expressed interest in long-term development, habitation, settlement, whatever it is, having to do with the moon and, in fact, with cislunar, and that NASA should truly partner, not just acknowledge, in the sense that the NASA activities and structures should be respectful of the priorities of such a partner who would take over the long-term aspects of the activities after the exploration wave moves beyond the moon to near-Earth asteroids or Mars or wherever it goes in the solar system. And that becomes a really important aspect of making all of this permanent and robust as opposed to temporary and transient. Well, those are my views, not necessarily the views of a lot of people, but the group of people that are managing the synthesis process are working very hard to try to keep open all avenues of expression within that process. Right now, the objectives, the grouped and structured objectives that we worked on are being fed back to these major stakeholder communities, and Paul Eckert through the Space Commerce Roundtable, and Jeff Taylor through the Lunar Exploration Analysis Group, and the Mike Dugan, Jerry Sanders through the In Situ Resources Utilization, and then there will be an international meeting, I think in the first week of August, where the people from NASA will be working with the international community to get their feedback. And then we've also fed it into the NASA field centers to get their ideas. And it was my hope that what would come back to us was not some kind of critique of what was being given to them, but a look at it as to exactly how complete it was everything captured in this process so far, and if not, what else should we add to it? In my mind, what I hope will come out of it is a menu or a tableau of all of the possibilities in space, and out of it we can all talk together about what ought to be done and how we all might participate, accomplish it, and interact with one another in the things we want to do. Within this menu, NASA will clearly be a subset. And there is a team of people inside NASA that is beginning to look at these objectives in their current form and is trying to establish what should be the NASA priorities and prioritizations. And quite frankly, those considerations have a lot to do with engineering and budget and space access systems, politics ultimately. But that group is also, I think, being very respectful of the universe of ideas and not trying to approach them with some sort of NASA viewpoint, and is really open to the idea of interaction. Now, the openness, the respectfulness that I'm talking about is actually happening 2 or 3 layers down inside the agency. And quite often I know the things that you see most are the statements by the administrator or the Associate Administrator for Exploration or the Associate Administrator for Science Missions Directorate. They have certain corporate positions they have to maintain or have developed, and they seem in many ways to the external community to be narrow and focused and parochial. But I can tell you that within the agency we're doing our best in a number of venues to try to keep open all the options and to be aware that, you know, NASA is not the only game in space, and that in fact, in my opinion, NASA will need everybody in the future process, both as partners, as modes of interaction, and in fact, just as a general expression of the interest of humanity in exploration, as opposed to some sort of parochial agency self-interest as seen by the political process. So in December of this year, in the first there will be a pretty good-sized conference in Houston, Texas. I think you may have seen announcements for it where we will be presenting what we think are the results of this lunar synthesis process, and we're inviting stakeholders of all kinds to come to that conference and present their ideas. So I want you to keep your eyes open for it because I think it'll be a fairly important event. It will be held at the George Brown Convention Center in Houston, which is a huge venue. It should not be the problem that was faced in Orlando a couple of years ago where there was just not enough room for everybody. And I also felt the Orlando conference was somewhat mysterious as to its purpose and how it originated. I never quite understood it. But I think this conference is going to be one where we'll be posing it as a dialogue. Now, quite frankly, NASA's not going to do all these things. I just want to emphasize that. NASA has an agenda which it must follow because of various constraints it's under, and some of those constraints are political, some of them are budgetary, some of them are technical, and it can't do all of these things. But it is my fervent hope that the processes we are working in right now are going to be much more open and respectful of outside entities than they have been in the past. That doesn't mean everything's going to be glorious, but I'm cautiously optimistic that as this effort grows over the next few years, that we will have more opportunities for a constructive interaction as opposed to a prescriptive interaction of some kind. Thank you very much.
Did y'all have any questions for Wendell? Or any questions out there?
Yes, Bruce?
Wendell, at the April workshop, I thought your talk was the best.
Oh, thank you, Bruce.
The fact that Rick left you off is
Bless.
yeah. But
Actually, I want to be really clear. I said 6 groups. I didn't leave Wendell's off. I left Zubrin's group off.
Yeah. Hey,
well, one of the things that you said that really struck me, and I wanted to compliment you both for the pithiness of the statement of courage with which you said it, is that if settlement is the long-term goal, then NASA has the wrong architecture. And I was wondering what kind of response you got to that, and did anybody, hear it?
you're asking me that question?
Yeah.
Well,
Well, one, did I get it right? Did you?
well, I tried not to say explicitly that NASA has the wrong architecture. What I tried to say was that my group reflected an opinion that there were other architectures for people who didn't have the money to build and sustain a big rocket, and that these kinds of architectures were viable and had certain advantages to them. And in fact, if the NASA architecture is built on the heavy lift vehicle for whatever reason, it is my hope that there will be some kind of process by which alternative architecture, and I don't know whether it'll come out of Europe or the commercial community, will also be developed that is not just subservient to the NASA architecture. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, I feel it's enormously important to have independent actors in this space. That if NASA is the monopsony, the only customer in all of this, then we're going to go back to the old way. Unless we can find ways to open it up to where other people are doing their thing in addition to NASA doing its thing and the two can interact, that'd be tremendously important. And one of the reasons it's important is for redundancy. One of the issues that came out of my group was that if there were alternative transportation architectures available, a European-Russian consortium, for example, or whatever, to move into space, then if there is a design flaw in the NASA system, whatever it turns out to be, so that it's down for 2 years, we're not dead in the water. So I think that even whatever architecture you choose, there needs to be various players and ways to get there to the various places we think are important in space. I can't make a comment on the fact that the NASA architecture is right or wrong. I'm not a rocket scientist, and over the that I've thought about these problems, I have encountered people on both sides of that argument, people whose judgment I respected. And I know that there are people other than Mike Griffin who will just froth at the mouth if you tell them that the heavy lift vehicle is not the answer. I don't know exactly what perspective those people come from. It may be a perspective that has to do with getting certain kinds of jobs done in the most efficient way, and they see the heavy lift vehicle as the answer to that. There are other people who see the heavy lift vehicle as a barrier to a multi-dimensional interaction in space. I don't know what the right answer is, but right now Mike Griffin's the boss, and he has chosen that path, and I think from a technical point of view, as near as I can determine from sampling everybody, it is certainly a technically viable path in terms of ISP and payload delivery and assembly and so on. People worry about whether it is a financially viable path or whether it's a viable path in sustainability. I don't consider myself enough an expert to address those questions, and I just try to listen to all people that I think have reasonable ideas.
I, on the other hand, am not a rocket scientist either, and am too to not know what I don't know, so I'll just talk anyway. I think that I'm a citizen. It's my job to tell the government what I think they should be doing. Yeah, okay, pay attention now. We begin with, oh, sorry. It ain't going to happen. The current architecture is not going to happen. I'll bet $10 to everybody in this room it ain't going to happen. It's going to collapse of its own weight. What I'm worried about, it's going to take science down with it. It's going to take down all the other possibilities at the same time. It ain't going to happen. It will not succeed. It is politically unsustainable. It is technically, right now, just going completely off the rails. Even the people that came in with good ideas, even Horowitz himself, who had a nice idea for a quick way to do it, even, you know, whether you're a socialist or not, it's a different question, but he had a nice, quick little, you know, what I called spaceman on a stick at the time, but still, it kind of made sense. Even that idea has now gone off the rails. Suddenly, the capsule that's going to be on the top of the stick is bigger. Now they need an extra segment on that. Now we've got instability problems and blah, 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 blah. We've seen this before, over and over and over again. How many times does Homer Simpson have to stick his finger in the light socket before he realizes he's going to get shocked? And we sit here and we allow it to happen. So I have a very slightly strong opinion in that area. The idea that on the specifics of a heavy lift vehicle versus supporting commercial interests, we've done one door to space. We've done one way of getting in space, and there are 3 models of that door laying in front of space centers around the country. We don't want one door anymore. We need multiple pathways into space. We need multiple ways of getting there. Now, the COTS program that has been put in place is probably one of the brightest spots in the entire NASA transportation side. And I do separate the transportation side from the sort of work that Wendell does. And, you know, the COTS program is great. $500 million. We spend $5 billion a year on the space shuttle, whether it flies or not. So between now and when it allegedly is going to quit, and it'll probably wind down before then when they blow one up or something. But $5 billion a year between now and 2010 is going to be spent on flying space shuttles to build a space station that we've already decided we're going to cancel in 2018. There is a level of insanity going on in our space program now that is incredible. There is a disconnect with any sort of reality that is incredible. It is amazing. And we let it roll on. Why? Why are we doing this? Well, I believe, as President Eisenhower did when he made the great speech where he talked about the aerospace industrial complex, that's what's driving it, not opening space. Powerful political and industrial constituencies are bringing home the bacon. No interest in opening the frontier. They have an interest in keeping contracts going. And that's all it's about right now. If we were interested in opening the frontier, we would cancel the space shuttle. We would immediately wind it down, and we would transfer that money into the COTS program. We would have multiple teams competing for COTS. We would create, the way we supported the airlines with airmail, we would create contract systems that enable all kinds of rockets to carry all kinds of payloads to all kinds of places. One rocket carrying large government payloads does not create an industrial infrastructure, and without that, you cannot sustain a settlement, or you cannot sustain an economy off planet. It's just my opinion, but I don't know any better. Next.
So, one quick point. Sounds like perhaps you're almost making the argument, coming from the doctor, maybe out of a job at some point. If you see the future of NASA as being unresponsive to these various stimuli to try and move it in a more sustainable and long-term process, fundamentally then, to some no small extent, you see the new space, and I don't mean to misuse the term to those who are using that and coining that, as a competitor, at least in some very limited ways, and certain business segments with NASA. So my question is this, obviously I've spoken a lot. My question is this, how do you see NASA developing over the course of the next 5 and 10 years in such a way as it will react to an industry which will be more successful at demonstrating payload delivery systems to low Earth orbit, and et cetera, where NASA will then have to back out of those business spaces?
It's an interesting question. First of all, about my job. I have maxed out the retirement system. So thank you. So I can fade into the sunset at will. Rick has to worry more about his job. And quite frankly, in 1992, before some of you were born, I came to the conclusion that NASA was so broken it had to be destroyed and couldn't be fixed. That didn't happen, although Dan Golden tried. NASA now is back, and and quite frankly, most of you don't realize this, but an enormous disruption in the force within NASA in 2004 to 5 under Admiral Steidl, and particularly under John Mankins. And it created a set of conditions within the different field centers that I don't have time to go into that Mike Griffin has had to deal with. I have felt for many years that NASA needed to restructure in order to respond to the market. And my analogies were IBM in the early 90s, GM in the 80s, Hewlett-Packard more recently, where large companies who were considered to be immortal behemoths suddenly realized they were moving out of relevance and changed the whole way they were structured and worked in their market spaces. IBM now is described as the world's largest computer service company, whereas for a while it was the largest PC manufacturer, and before that it was the mainframe company. And so it's morphed at least twice in order to remain successful. Part of a corporate restructuring has to do with layoffs and closing of facilities and reopening new facilities, and that tool is simply unavailable to a NASA administrator. You cannot close a NASA field center. You cannot lay off people and change the skill mix directly. So it's a massive problem to try to continue new kinds of work with the tools that you have. And I think the people in charge right now are doing a really important. They're trying sincerely to make that work and create a NASA that will execute this vision. The gist of your question at the very end is, will NASA back out of it because there is an alternative structure developing in space? And quite frankly, I hope so, because as long as there is a there is no competitor. As long as there is a vacuum of activity outside the NASA set of activities, NASA can never sense, in some sense, through the political process or through the administrative process, the steering currents, because there are no steering currents. But if there were a shaping environment, which might be Bigelow Hotels or Musk Transportation Systems, if there are steering currents that are outside the NASA activity, I think that the political process, which by the way is NASA, will cause a shift in what NASA does. And I think it's just tremendously important for two reasons. First of all, to set the idea in the public mind, in the political mind, that there is an alternative and competent process. And secondly, to within the NASA mind to demonstrate that other people can do this. There are a lot of people in NASA who believe we are the only ones who can do this. And even within NASA, there are pockets of people and specialties who believe they're the only people who can do that specialty, and that you shouldn't ever have a company that will build, for example, a moon lander. So if you look historically at changes in processes, you find that when the first new thing happens and everybody who said it was impossible sees it, there's a huge turnover, and suddenly whole new ideas and activities blossom. It's my hope that within this community, that kind of event can be nurtured and can be created, because I think that's the only thing that will change the direction. We need to have external steering currents in order to demonstrate, particularly to the political process, that these other things are possible.
I think Wendell has hit it on the head. And look around the room and to see some of the people that are going to be presenting. And take that as a projection. If you had been at a foundation conference, and some of you were 8 years ago, and some of the people talking about the nifty things they were going to do, that they're doing now, okay? We have 2 companies that are talking about circumnavigating the moon commercially at this conference. We have Bigelow. We have, in a few years, we're going to have Elon Musk and Rocket Plane and Space Dev and all these other companies servicing modules like Bigelow's. The infrastructure will be created. At that point, it's going to hopefully be so obvious, even to some of the Congress critters, that this is happening, that it's going to look ridiculous to have NASA trying to carry human beings into space, and maybe we can get them back to doing some of the glorious and incredible scientific stuff they do. It's no accident, by the way, that we have Neville Marswell coming from JPL Advanced Projects. There are a lot of people in the agency who believe these things as well, and they want to get on with exploration. They don't want to drive trucks and build buildings. That's our job. So let's go make some money doing it. Thank you all.
Okay, now we're going to move on to our next panel. While our panelists are getting set up, I want to make another announcement for